Hello dear students, this is Sonali and today we are going to start a new chapter 2.4 in our English textbook by the name The Fall of Troy. The fall of Troy means the destruction of Troy. Now about what we are going to discuss in the lesson is Troy is the city in the northwest area in Asia Minor, that is Turkey, which happens to be a part of Turkey. Troy is now a part of western Turkey. Troy is also known as Hisarlik city. The old Troy was spread across 3 lakh square meters area and was ruled by the Romans. The War of Troy is also known as Trojan War, which was between Greece and Troy. So it was between the city of Greece and the city of Troy. In this lesson, the people of Greece are known as Greeks, and the people of Troy are known as Trojans. So before we begin with the lesson, let us understand the main characters of this lesson. So according to the Greek mythology, first of all, children, this is based on the Greek mythology. Generally, we have very famous stories in India, also in our Hindu culture. These famous stories are, or famous epics, I must say, are of like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. So these are the most famous epics of our country, or of our country. Similarly, in the European nations, in the Greek mythology, there are two famous epics as well, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. So these what are these about, that also we are going to see. But the way we have great epics or great stories in India or in our country, similarly there are great stories in other countries as well. So these stories are recited over again and again, so that they pass on the historical information. They tell us about the great deeds of the great leaders, or about a great big very huge war, and all about the circumstances and the situation of the war. So these are usually called as the epics, and this is a part of the Iliad, a Greek mythology or a Greek epic. So the we were discussing about the characters in this lesson, the lead or the main characters in this lesson. So according to the Greek mythology, Troy, the city of Troy, was ruled by King Priam and his wife, whose name was Hecuba. King Priam had in all he had 68 boys and 18 girl childs. So the eldest son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba was Hector. So now Hector is one of the very leading characters in this. Hector was the prince of Troy, who soon would become the king of Troy. He was a great warrior, and during the entire Trojan War, he was the commander of the army, and he alone killed as many as 31,000 Greek soldiers. So you must be able to imagine how great warrior he was. The second child of King Priam and Queen Hecuba was Paris. So the first child was Hector, the second was Paris. He was born, when he was born, as soon as he was born, they came to know that he would be the reason of Troy's destruction. And so he was left in the forest to die. As they came to know that he was going to be the reason for the destruction of Troy, so they abandoned him and they left him in the forest to die. But a cattle rearer saw him, and he took him with him, and he raised him and took care of him. later on. During a boxing match, he was recognized by King Priam and he brought him back to the palace. He again decided to keep Paris with himself. Paris had run away with Helen, who was the queen of King Menelaus, king of Sparta. Now there was a place called Sparta, and from that Sparta, the king of that Sparta was King Menelaus. Menelaus' wife was Helen, and she was the most beautiful woman on the earth. She was very, very, very beautiful. In the Indian culture, we believe, or we learn that Padmavati was the very, very beautiful lady. So similarly, in the Greek mythology, it is believed that Helen was the most beautiful lady on the earth, and she was the daughter of god Zeus. Now the next character, so okay, by till now we have understood that King Priam and Queen Hecuba had many children, but then out of them their first child was Hector, who was a very good warrior. He had killed as good as 31 Greek soldiers. Then we also learned that their second child was Paris, who at the time of birth only they came to know that he was the reason of Troy's destruction, and so he was left in the forest to die. But later on, after few years, during a boxing match, King Priam recognized him and he brought him back to the palace. Then we also come to know that he had run away with Helen, who was the queen of King Menelaus, and Menelaus was the king of Sparta. And Helen was the daughter of the god Zeus. Now the next character is Agamemnon. Agamemnon was the elder brother of King Menelaus. He was the commander of the Greek soldier in the Trojan Wars. So during the Trojan War, Agamemnon was the commander of the soldiers and he was the elder brother of King Menelaus. The next character is Odysseus. Odysseus was a very well-known leader, and in the Trojan War he was fighting for the Greeks from the Greek side and King Menelaus. So Greeks were led by the King Menelaus and in the war of Trojans. Only because of his cleverness it was possible to defeat Troy. Now this Odysseus was a very cunning leader, and therefore because of his leadership qualities and because of his cleverness, it was possible to defeat Troy. Otherwise Troy was a very strong city. The next character is Achilles. Achilles was the son of Thetis and King Peleus. These names are quite very different for us because these believed to the Greek mythology. We are not generally used to these Greek words. Now we were saying that Achilles was the son of Thetis and King Peleus. Now Peleus was a human being, and Thetis was the goddess of water. So Achilles was a man whose entire body was of thunderbolt, that is Vajra, which means he never had wounds on his body except for the heel of his leg. That is because when Achilles was born, his goddess mother had dipped him in the Styx river, catching hold of his heel. So his heel was not properly dipped in the water of Styx river, and so his heel was not of thunderbolt, and Achilles was fighting the war from the Greeks or the Menelaus side. Okay, let me explain this still better. Achilles जो था ना, वो उसकी मम्मी जो थी, she was a goddess of water, and so when Achilles was born, if you have seen Mahabharat, we all know that when Gandhari opened her eyes, she told her son that because she had kept her eyes closed for so many years, so when she opens the eyes, she was blessed with a um, gift that the first person she sees, or the one who sees, will not be his body will not be able to be destroyed. So similar power was this Thetis had with her. So, and she knew about it because she was the goddess of water, so she knew. And so when her child was born, what she did is उसके पैर की एक एड़ी को पकड़ के उसने उसको उस स्टिक रिवर में डुबाया, because the parts of his body which were dipped in that water will become of thunderbolt and will not be able to be injured. और इसीलिए एक्चुअली इसकी पूरी पूरी जो बॉडी थी वो वज्र की हो गई थी, एंड ओनली हिज heel of one leg was not of vajra, because that was not dipped in the water properly. Now now let us begin with the lesson. Now epics are long poems that relate the deeds of a great national hero or great national war. They often tell us a nation's early history. They may be composed and sung or recited for many years before they are actually written down. Now children, epics are big long poems which describe about a great leader or about great wars, national heroes or national wars. So these are basically poems, and therefore these poems are give us information about great kings of our country, also tell us about our nations, also tell us about our nation's history. Now these poems are made and recited for many years before they were actually written down. Generally it is like that, because all these great epics, they were actually made or composed quite before. Then they were orally recited, either they were recited or they were sung or they were told in uh, by many people, one after the other. That is how it was orally transmitted from one generation to another. And then finally when the written techniques came in, that time it was finally written down and compiled in a book. The two famous Sanskrit epics are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and the two great epics of the European literature written in ancient Greek are the Iliad and the Odyssey. So the two famous Sanskrit epics are the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which we all know very well. And similarly, this is about the Hindu or the Indian culture, but in the ancient Greek culture there were two epics in the European literature that by the name Iliad and the Odyssey. Just as in Indian literature we go back to stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, so the literature of Western countries, they go back to the Iliad and the Odyssey. Now so many times when children are small, we tell them the stories from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Sometimes when we need the references, or when we have to give some examples, we give the examples from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Similarly, the way we go back to our literature or our epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata, similarly the Greek people or the European people relate their examples, or they relate their stories to the Iliad and the Odyssey. Just as the Just as children all over India know the names of stories of Ram and Sita, Yudhishthira and Arjuna and Draupadi, so children in Western countries know the names of Hector, Odysseus and Achilles and Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the world, because of whom the Greek and the Trojans fought for 10 long years. So, the way we are very familiar with the characters of the Ramayana and Mahabharata, like Ram, Sita, Yudhishthir, Arjun, Draupadi, similarly, the children in the Western countries are very familiar with the names of the, or rather, the lead characters or the main characters of the Greek mythology, Iliad and Odyssey, like Hector, Odysseus, Achilles, Helen and Helen of Troy. And Helen, who was Helen? She was the most beautiful woman in the world, and because of her there was a war between the Greek and the Trojans, which lasted for 10 long years. Nobody knows for certain who the author of these early epics is. It is thought that they arose and developed with the nation itself and were handed down from singer to singer till perhaps one great poet gave them their final form. So no one knows when these great epics were formed or who was the author of these great epics, but it is believed that when the nation was formed, similarly these epics were also formed, and then they kept on developing with the nation as the nation developed, and finally it was and then it was again recited one after other by the different singers, one after the other, and finally probably one great poet gave them the final form. Finally one great poet gave them the final touches, and then it was made into a proper poem. It is believed that the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed and recited by the blind poet named Homer, who lived about 900 BCE and who wandered from one Greek city or village to another, singing his poems to all who would receive him and in their homes and give him hospitality. This wandering singer has been honored through the ages not only in Greece but in all Europe as the father of European poetry. The way we have a great poets, similarly Homer was a very great poet in very ancient times in the European countries, and therefore he is also called as the father of the European poetry. Now it is believed that the famous epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were composed and recited by this blind poet Homer, who lived about 900 BCE, and he kept on moving from one place to another so that he could reveal that epics to more number of people, and he used to go around places, he used to keep on wandering and singing and reciting the poems, and he would not just sing it to anyone and everyone, but he would sing it to the people who actually gave him respect, who invited him at their place, who used to give him respect. To those people only he used to sing. The Iliad is the story of Ilium of Troy, a rich trading city in Asia Minor near the narrow sea that leads into the Aegean, from the Aegean to the Black Sea. Now there is a very now this Iliad is the story of Ilium of Troy. Ilium is Ilium of Troy. It is about the Trojan War. The Iliad is about the Trojan War, and the Odyssey is about the life of King Odysseus after the War of Troy, when he was moving, he was going back to his uh, country Greece. That time his journey and everything is described in the Odysseus or Odyssey, sorry. So the Iliad is the story of the war of Troy, a rich trading city in Asia Minor. So it was a very rich city in Asia Minor, and it was situated near a very narrow sea, and this sea leads from the Aegean to the Black Sea. This small sea goes to the Aegean Sea. Aegean Sea further meets to the Black Sea. It was well situated both for commerce and agriculture. So the geographical location is given here, like the city of the city of Troy. It was very well situated because it was a why it was rich, because it was very well situated for both commerce, means for trading, and for agriculture as well. In front of the sea was in front of the city was the sea, over which sailed the ships of Troy carrying goods and grains. Now since it was rich in agriculture, uh, so they were trading a lot of uh, grains. Now why they were trading, now why is it called as a rich city? Because it had very good climatic conditions, so it was rich, and very good soil, so it was rich in agriculture, and then it was situated next to the sea, therefore the trading was very easy through ships, and that is how it was. Their trading and their agriculture both were very good, very strong, and therefore the city was very rich. At the back rose the high peak of Mount Ida, from which flowed many rivers and streams. Now, at the back side, there was a very high mountain peak uh, of Mount Ida, and from that, many rivers and streams flow, and therefore, it was very there was a lot of water flowing in Troy. The valleys among the hills were well watered and fertile, and corn growing in fertile fields, and cattle feeding on the rich grass of the meadows, while sheep fed on the slopes of the hills. So because of this mountain, and there were lots of streams from that mountain, so they used to bring all the fertile sand, fertile soil to Troy. Therefore the soil was very fertile. Also they have very good water supply or irrigation facility, because of the unlimited supply of water from the Mount Ida. Also they had a sea nearby adjacent to their land, and therefore it was very fertile soil. As the soil was fertile, there was a lot of grass or growing on that grass, and then it had very good corn growing on the fertile sand, and therefore the cattle were also very nice. They used to feed on the rich grass of the meadows, therefore they had a very rich cattle as well. Around their city, the Trojans had built a strong wall so that no enemy should attack them from the sea. The wall was so broad that people could stand, sit, and walk on it. So now the Trojans, they had built a very strong wall around their city so that no one can attack them from the sea. And these walls which they had constructed around their city were so broad that people could actually sit on these walls, they could stand on these walls, and they can even walk on these walls. They were so broad and strong. The great gates stood open. The people could go to the seashore outside and come in as they pleased. So they had huge gates in these walls, and these gates were normally kept open so that people of Troy, whenever they felt like going to the seashore, They used to go and come back as they pleased. But in the time of war, the gates would be closed, and then the city was like a strong fortress, quite safe from all attack, protected by the walls surrounding it as well as by the hills behind. So at their back behind, or at that back side of the Troy, it was safe because it had a very tall mountain peak of Mount Ida, and the remaining three sides were covered by the strong walls built by the Trojans. And when these gates, which were normally kept open, if they were closed at the time of war, it used to become a very strong fort, and it was highly impossible to attack Troy after that. It was very, very safe from any attack once the doors were closed. Thus, Troy was a strong city, strongly protected by its walls and strongly defended by its brave soldiers. So it was very strong. Troy was very strong, not only because it was protected from all the sides, but also because it had a very strong soldiers, which were capable enough to defend their enemies and keep their Troy very safe. But all the kings and heroes of the Greece had declared war against the Trojans because Paris, a king of Troy, had persuaded Helen, wife of a Greek king Menelaus, to elope with him. Now, although Troy was very safe and very strong, it also had very strong soldiers, brave soldiers, but still the kings of Greece had declared war against the Trojans, against the people of Troy, because Paris, the second son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, Paris, who was a prince of Troy, had persuaded means convinced Helen. Now, Helen was the wife of the Greek king Menelaus, to elope with him. He had persuaded, or he convinced her to run away with him. And since the wife of the Greek king Menelaus was with Paris, who was a prince of Troy, so Menelaus had broken a war, or Greeks have broken a war against the Trojans. He had brought her to Troy. The Greeks wanted to take revenge on Troy for the wrong done to Menelaus. Now, of course, taking away someone's wife is really very wrong, and therefore, to take the revenge of this, the Greeks had broken a war against Troy because they wanted to take the revenge of the wrong that was done to Menelaus. They sailed to Troy and led siege to the city. So they sailed to Troy and they had a war against the Trojans. The Trojans too fought hard, and the siege continued for 10 long years. So, as both were strong, the Trojans were strong, the Troy was strong, and also the Greek leaders were very, very strong. So, therefore, the war continued for 10 long years. The fighting went on daily, but the siege did not end. On the other hand, Greek could not take the city. On the one hand, the Greeks could not take the city, and on the other hand, the Trojans could not force them to sail away. So, what happened that the fighting went on daily and it continued for 10 long years. But the war, or the fight, did not end. On one side, the Greeks were not able to uh, defeat the Trojans and enter the city of Troy, and on the other hand, the Trojans were also not uh, able to defeat the Greeks and send them back home, or back to the Greece. every day the Trojans came out of their gates and the Greeks came out of their tents and ships, and the fighting went on. Sometimes there were great battles between two armies. Sometimes there were single fights between two great heroes. Sometimes the Trojans had the better of it, and sometimes the Greeks. But still the fighting went on. Now they have described the fights, like every morning when at the time of war, what used to happen, that the Greeks, the Trojans used to come out of out of their gates and fight against the Greeks. The Greeks used to come out of their tents and they used to have a fight with the Trojans. Sometimes it was a war between it was a fight between two groups of soldiers. Sometimes it was a one-to-one fight between great heroes, and sometimes it used to be that the Trojans were on the higher side, sometimes it was the Greeks on the higher sides. So somehow it kept on going on and on, but it was showing no signs of the end of the war. Great heroes on both sides were killed in the course of the war. After leading a defense of his city for 9 years, the brave Hector was at last killed by Achilles, whom none could resist. Now, Achilles, we have seen, is very strong, and after 9 years of great war, finally, the king, or rather the prince of the eldermost prince of Troy, Hector, was killed by Achilles. Achilles, we have seen, was a very strong person. He was a very good leader, and he was also blessed with the thunderbolt. So it was very difficult to resist him. But Achilles himself was later killed by a poisoned arrow that entered his heel, the only part of his body where he could be wounded. So as we have seen in the introduction, that his heel was the body part which would get wounded, and therefore he was attacked on his heel with a poisoned arrow, and because of that he died. Still later, Paris himself was killed, also by a poisoned arrow. So after some time, or after few days, even Paris was killed. He was also killed by a poisoned arrow. The Trojans were tired of being shut up in their city, and the Greeks were longing to see their homes again. But still the fighting went on. So after 10 years is a very long period. So everyone was like fed up of this war. Everyone wanted that the war should end. The Trojans were really very tired and they were very bored, the way we are now. They were bored because they were stuck into the closed gates of their walls. They were stuck up in the Troy city. They could not move out. We are tired because we are also locked up in our homes. We cannot go out because of the virus, the pandemic. And the Greeks were also longing to see their city. Now they were out of their houses for 10 long years, so they were very much longing to see. They were wanting to go home again and see their loved ones. But still the fighting went on and on and on. Here we come to the end of part 1. I'll send you the workshop questions of this, and the marginal questions as well. The moment I send you all, please make it a point to write it in your notebooks so that we can proceed for the exams. Now exams in the sense class test. Okay, so today please complete part 1. I'll send you in some time. Thank you so much.